Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertion and passionate concern of dedicated individuals." We are here today to commemorate the sacrifice, suffering, and struggle of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fred Korematsu, who fought for justice not just for themselves or their communities, but for all Americans. As the presiding judge of the Santa Clara County Superior Court, I join in that commemoration, but particularly want to recognize the tireless exertions and passionate concern of the dedicated individuals in this court, staff, administrator, and judges who take steps every day in the goal of justice that we share.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. As lawyers and judicial officers, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Our court exists to establish and provide justice for all people. Throughout history, people have fought for justice by bringing actions in the courts. Over 80 years ago, a young man in Northern California, Fred Korematsu, started a legal fight to seek justice, not just for himself, but for all Americans. Although he lost in 1944, 40 years ago, Fred Korematsu again returned to court, and this time succeeded, obtaining a judicial declaration that the laws which incarcerated 120,000 men, women, and children without any due process merely because of their ancestry was wrong. On Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution, January 30th, 2023, we commemorate Fred Korematsu's courage to seek justice through the courts.
Martin Luther King Jr. and Fred Korematsu are two Americans who have worked for justice for all Americans, not just for Black Americans or Japanese Americans. As Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." The Equality and Social Justice Committee of the Santa Clara County Superior Court was founded in 2020 as part of the commitment of the court and its judges to provide equal justice for all persons who come to our court. The Equality and Social Justice Committee invites you to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr. and Fred Korematsu, and we hope you will be inspired by their lives and legacies.
Hi, I'm Roberta Hayashi. On January 30th, 2015, I took the oath of office to become a judge of the Santa Clara County Superior Court. I chose to swear in on Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution as my way of honoring one of my personal heroes, Fred Korematsu. As a Sansei, a third-generation Japanese American, I grew up knowing nothing about the World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans. My father, his family, and friends told our generation nothing about camp or the pain and humiliation of being forced to sell their homes and belongings, to be detained and relocated. When I was a law student, I read the World War II Supreme Court decisions, Korematsu, Yasui, and Hirabayashi, and struggled to understand how people like my father, my aunt and uncles, and cousins could be labeled enemy aliens and imprisoned without due process. So when, as a young lawyer, I heard that Fred Korematsu had filed a writ petition to overturn his conviction and came to understand the difference that one individual can make by speaking up for what is right, I was and have continued to be inspired by him and his message of seeking justice, not just for himself or his community, but for all Americans. As Fred Korematsu said, Do not let what happened to Japanese Americans happen to anyone else.
Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." One of the most serious threats to justice faced by our country was the World War II incarceration of over 120,000 men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry, most of them from California. On January 31st, 1983, Fred Korematsu filed his petition for writ of coram nobis in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. It was the very same court which had previously convicted him of violating the 1942 laws prohibiting anyone of Japanese ancestry from living in the Western United States and requiring that they be held in detention camps. On November 10th, 1983, Judge Marilyn Hall Patel presided over a courtroom in San Francisco filled with survivors of World War II incarceration camps and their families. She invited Fred Korematsu to address the court, and he said, "Your Honor, I still remember 40 years ago when I was handcuffed and arrested as a criminal. We can never forget this incident as long as we live. The horse stalls that we stayed in were made for horses and not human beings. As long as my record stands in federal court, any American citizen can be held in prison or a concentration camp without a trial or hearing. That is if they look like the enemy of this country. Therefore, I would like to see the government admit that they are wrong and do something about it so this will never happen again to any American citizen of any race, creed, or color."
On November 10th, 1983, Judge Marilyn Hall Patel ruled for the bench and granted Fred Korematsu's writ of coram nobis. She found that the U.S. government had erred, and they admitted they erred, in 1944 when they concealed evidence that the men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry who had been incarcerated were not a threat to national security. Although she could not overturn the United States Supreme Court's decision in Korematsu versus the United States, she could set aside Fred Korematsu's conviction. And in her later written decision, Judge Patel stated, "Korematsu stands as a caution that in times of distress, the shield of military necessity and national security must not be used to protect governmental actions from close scrutiny and accountability. It stands as a caution that in times of international hostility and antagonisms, our institutions, legislative, executive, and judicial, must be prepared to exercise their authority to protect all citizens from petty fears and prejudices that are so easily aroused."
Judge Johnny Gogo undertook an amazing effort to collect the signatures and stories of the survivors of the World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans.
It's now kind of my mission to take those flags throughout the United States, to track down survivors of those prison camps, to give them the opportunity to sign these flags as a way to remember their sacrifice.
I also wanted to share another update about the flag signing project. Again, one of our college students at Santa Clara University, Jordan Tachibana, was able to take flag number 7 back to the East Coast for a couple of months for folks to sign the flag. And Jordan's younger sister, Taylor Tachibana, was also inspired by Fred Korematsu Day events and the flag signing project. And she also, in a very creative way, was able to help share the message with other folks. Taylor was able to make a Japanese kimono, and on the back, Taylor had the words written, "Never again, Executive Order 9066. And so this flag signing project continues to inspire the next generation of leaders in our community. Thank you.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's one of my favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quotes. We started the Equality and Social Justice Committee in 2020 to ensure that everyone who comes into the doors of Santa Clara County receives justice. I have to tell you that I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know if it's the way I grew up or where I grew up, but I always knew that I wanted to be a part of the social justice system. I never imagined in a million years that I would be able to participate as a judge. I'm so honored to serve the people of Santa Clara County, and that is because of people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mr. Fred Korematsu, who paved the way for us to have a seat at the table. So I know that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams come true. So please join me as we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. and Fred Korematsu, and let's make space at the table for everyone.
In January each year, we celebrate the legacies of two American civil rights icons, Mr. Fred Korematsu and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'd like to share with you how their legacies inspire me. In 1942, an order forced people of Japanese ancestry into incarceration camps. Fred Korematsu resisted that order. Instead, he bravely fought through our courts because he believed in liberty and fairness for all Americans. Fast forward to 75 years later, there was another order, this time against the Middle Eastern communities, denying travel to the United States. Those affected by the order similarly challenged the order through our courts because they believed that the ban unjustly discriminated against them based on their ethnicity or national origin. In this way, they captured the spirit of Fred Korematsu's fight against this type of injustice. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. inspires our ongoing pursuit of justice. He's famously stated, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." These meaningful words influence my core ideals in public service. As an Iranian-American woman, these words resonate with me deeply as we witness global efforts for equality led by courageous women, men, and youth abroad. Woman, life, freedom. The compelling legacies of Fred Korematsu and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. inspire me because they are rooted in equality, fairness, and justice, regardless of race, gender, or ethnicity.
Hello, my name is Julia Elogimento, and I am a judge of Santa Clara County Superior Court and chair of our Court Community Outreach Committee. On this day of celebration and recognition, I want to take a moment to express gratitude for the inspiration and leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. MLK led by unifying, not dividing. He motivated through love, not hate, and he understood that the true path to justice comes through the collaboration of individuals within a community. When MLK spoke of community, he said, "At the heart of all that civilization has meant and developed is community, the mutually cooperative and voluntary venture of man to assume a semblance of responsibility for his brother." I am grateful for the community in which I live and serve and the people, men, women, and non-binary with whom I work both in the justice system and outside of it. Teachers, community leaders, nonprofit organizers, students, faith leaders, and other stakeholders who so often collaborate together for the benefit of us all. The quest for justice is not always easy, and progress can be met with disappointment, but I know that disappointment or challenges will not stop the power of dedicated individuals. As MLK reminds us, we must accept finite disappointment, but we must never lose infinite hope. On this day of celebration, my wish for our community is to continue to move forward together for the benefit of us all and with infinite hope.
So I'm Judge Andrea Flint, and I grew up in Southern California, and where I grew up, there weren't many people who looked like me. And when I attended elementary school, I was the only one who looked like me in my class, the only African American throughout elementary school in my class, so it was not easy. And I remember that the only black people I ever saw in our history books were slaves until they introduced us to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I still remember feeling that I mattered and that I could too take a leadership role once I got exposed to someone like him. When my kids were growing up, when they were in elementary school, they had the day off. And so every Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I sat them down and they listened to the entire I Have a Dream speech. And I wanted to make sure that they appreciated who he was, the sacrifices he made for all of us, and that they understood the value and the power of the written and spoken word. Because every day in court, I try to remind myself of how important choosing the right words are. I'm not always successful, not always perfect, but I'm well aware of the power of the words we choose. So I thank Dr. King for showing me that I can be a leader and that my words